Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Live Show. Remember, 5 days a week, this time, 11 a.m. Eastern, if you're watching on the rebroadcast. Because if you miss the show, you can always catch it later. And again, during the preseason, remember, I take Thursdays and Fridays off. So, yeah, I wasn't around the last couple days, but that's going to be the plan each week. People got to take a day off here and there, Theo. Now, remember, if you like these shows, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you're on RotoWire YouTube. It lets us know if the show is something you value. And again, give us follows on socials. I'll hit you up with Theo's in a minute. Mine's at Jim Coventry NFL. I do post these player threads, 5 to 7 a week. I'm bringing in my friend Theo Greminger. He's a player profiler. He's a director of content over there. Now, his big claim to fame, and I love this one, the NFFC Silver Bullet runner-up and number 1 combined standings was 2019, but those are tough to crack. So to get that at any time, huge, badge on the chest. Now, you find him on the Sonic Truth podcast, First Class Fantasy, the GOAT District, press coverage. He's all over the place. So you can follow him on Twitter at the OG Fantasy Football. And Theo, I love how you take your name Theo and turn it into the OG. I'm sure that's exactly what you did. Tell everybody how you are.
I'm doing great. The name goes both ways, Jim. You know, we're grinding out here. It's awesome. I'm with you completely. Like, this is an exciting time. We're creeping up on August. The season's right around the corner. We're 40 days out. I believe today is 40 days out officially from kickoff. So it's like no more messing around. It's time to get serious and time to draft some league winners.
100%, Theo. Dame Overboard, thanks for joining us. News and notes, we always start with that. And of course, it's a day old, but that's when we got to cover it. We're here today. So Coach Zach Taylor, he says Joe Burrow is going to miss several weeks with a calf strain. Now, we have almost 6 weeks till the opener. So calf strain, not really likely going to be any issue here. And the last 3 days, fantasymojo.com, my go-to for ADP. So the last 3 days, he's quarterback 5. He's unchanged since the injury. Theo, any news here?
I think like kind of the big change is on Underdog. You're able to see Joe Burrow kind of slipping sometimes into like the 5th round when he was living in the 4th round. So personally for me, I think right now this is like a buying opportunity. It doesn't scare me that much. You know, this is a guy who's bounced back from injury before. It doesn't sound like something incredibly serious. I just hope it's not something that lingers because I think that offense is going to be incredibly explosive this year. We're banking so much on Ja'Marr Chase. And then T. Higgins and Joe Mixon have steamed up big time too. So, go Joe Burrow, go get healthy. But I think if you're drafting this week, take the discount. When we get some positive news, I think it'll come right back up.
You know, Theo, it's like last week, there was a 1-week discount on Saquon Barkley. When there was all that discord, people who were drafting in the beginning of the draft, they now had access to him in the 2nd round, and that's not going to be a thing anymore. So like you said, those buying opportunities, when you're talking a half round on a player, to me, that's significant because you won't have access to that once the news straightens out. Let's move to our next player here. So we're going to the Buffalo Bills news here. Ken Dorsey tells the reporters he's really excited about James Cook. He believes he has 3 down back potential. Now, Theo, to me, this almost sounds like that June camp talk a little bit. Yeah, he can play on all 3 downs a little bit. He's 190 pounds, and they bring in both Damian Harris and Latavius Murray. And I know Latavius Murray has kind of been washed for years, but he could take, I call them innings eaters. He could get those early down carries if Damian Harris craps out. But if Damian Harris can take care of this, it's fine. But overall, when we look at the ADP on James Cook, last 3 days, again, Fantasy Mojo, he's running back 31 and he's pick 83. Literally, it's where I have him. I have him the same running back 31, pick 86. Breaking him down a little bit. So last year, they eased him in, of course. His usage did ramp up as the season went on. He had been held to 5 or fewer carries in like 9 of the first 11 games. But then after that, he saw 11 or more carries in 4 of 9 games. So it was ramping a bit up. And then he had that nice 5.7 yards per carry. Now, Theo, you realize this, that playing Buffalo, you get yards before contact as a running back because teams are playing the pass, they're playing Josh Allen, and what's happened is they just couldn't get extra from Devin Singletaries. And, back in the day, the other running back they got rid of, he was in Indianapolis. Help me out here. Why can't I think of his name? Zach Moss.
Yeah, Zach Moss.
So these guys just couldn't do more with what they were given. Well, so we have James Cook, 81st percentile broken tackle rate. So it looks like he can work there. And then he saw his receiving usage ramp up as well. So overall, I think that, yes, he could play on 3 downs, but I think we're looking 5 to 8 carries a game. I don't think it's going to be more than that. They want to preserve him from an explosiveness standpoint. And in the passing game, there will be some design passes, but Josh Allen isn't the guy that's going to be looking to get the ball to his running back and receiving him. He's looking downfield. What are your thoughts on how James Cook usage looks and what you're thinking about him as a fantasy player this year?
So I'm maybe a little bit more bullish on him than you are. I think that like year 2, they trust him a bit more. And the backs that you referenced, like Latin Murray seemed to me like he was going to be in a battle for the RB3 with Nyheim Hines before the Hines injury. So I think he's way out of the equation. Damian Harris, obviously the threat on the goal line. I think that's the plan. But if he just takes over the Devin Singletary receiving work, like Devin Singletary, I don't think has much talent as a receiver,
Right.
but he's still over 50 targets for 3 straight seasons in that offense. And James Cook with his explosiveness, if he can get, 50 to 60 targets with the 8 carries a game you're projecting, and maybe if we're a little off and that becomes 10 carries a game, I think he could return value on ADP. I mean, he's certainly not a league winner, but structurally, I think he makes some sense where he's going. Where I think he could slide into RB2 range. It could still be an unimpactful number, but I think that he could beat, his RB31 price and finish somewhere like RB24, RB23.
Theo, it's a good counterpoint because we know they want their running back to be a thing there. They spent draft capital on Moss. They spent draft capital on Singletary. It's a priority to them. They spent capital on Cook. So they want the running back to be a thing.
And McKissick, they made a big effort to have a receiving back in McKissick. And then there was the Christian McCaffrey rumors that when San Francisco got him, Buffalo was calling. So I think they want to pass and catch the ball. Like Cook showed that at Georgia, got downfield even, not just like little dump offs. Like he can get downfield. They ran a couple wheel routes for him. And I don't know. I'm slightly bullish. I think also the fact that we don't have a clear like target tree in terms of the wide receivers after Stephon Diggs. We're talking about guys like Kincaid, maybe Gabe Davis is a little more consistency, maybe Khalil Shakir picks up. I don't think they have enough weapons that they can kind of ignore James Cook. So I think there's paths for him. I understand the caution, but it seems like the price is already baked in. You get the potential RB1 in this offense at like an 8th round price. I think it's fine where he's going. I don't think he'll hurt your builds. And I think there's some upside at taking him there.
No, I agree with you. In the 8th round, there's a point in the draft where you've got to stake your claim to players. And that's about the round area where you're starting to say, if I believe this guy has upsides, I'm pushing the button and I'm drafting him. And so this is one of those players that falls in that bucket. The one thing that I'm thinking about as we're talking, Theo, is redundancy. So if Cook is going to be used as a receiving weapon, it means more than dump offs and screens. It means they might want to get him out into the formation. You mentioned Khalil Shakir. Now, he didn't play much last year, but he did look like a guy who belonged. And if their vision for Dalton Kincaid that we're hearing is true, they're going to move him into a slot. It makes it concerning. There could be a redundancy of targets in that area of the field. Now, we know everybody's playing zone defense at a high rate, so there's going to be advantages there. Again, not disagreeing because I do think there's big upside for Cook. Do you think there's any concern with the redundancy of targets with potential for Kincaid, Shakir, and James Cook?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I don't think it's ideally, we wanted Buffalo to be getting a DeAndre Hopkins type weapon to play opposite Stephon Diggs. It just didn't happen. They were also linked to maybe drafting one of the wide receivers in the draft, ended up with Kincaid. So, I think, again, they have a lot of guys who can win intermediate routes. Gabe Davis is kind of like the key there because if he's going to play a little healthier this year, whether or not he's impactful for our fantasy teams, I think stylistically having that deep threat, the big man getting downfield, I think that's going to be important for the Buffalo offense. I mean, there were times where they looked a lot easier to stop than we would have thought, like as an offense. So I don't know. I think that at the end of the day, Kincaid, Cook, I want to take shots at like the potential young upside guys in Buffalo when I can get them at a discount. I'm not going to reach for them, but I think that there's, again, like you bring up all the kind of redundancy, and if everything's kind of ambiguous, let me take the younger unknown upside guys.
Love it. So it gets, you know what? That's probably as good of a breakdown as you're going to get on the intermediate field of the Buffalo Bills. So definitely consider any of them. I like Shakir as a late dart throw in these 20-round drafts. Love him there as well. All right, before we move on, let's compete for a shot at $250K and a free RotoWire subscription. You can play in the NFFC Beat Jim Coventry 3 draft. That's going to be Tuesday, August 15th. 8 p.m. Eastern. The draft's going to be live stream. We're going to feature people on there. To sign up, it's linked to my Twitter profile at Jim Coventry NFL. Love to see you there. All right, moving on to news, Theo. Brian Robinson, he says he feels healthier than he ever was last season. And that was my thought. As he played last year, it's like the dude had multiple gunshot wounds, and he came back to the field very quickly. Now, I was not high on him as a prospect to start. His 4.53 speed is good for a guy that's 228 pounds, not complaining about that at all. But the 35th percentile explosiveness, I just don't know how to wash last year and say how much of it was gunshot-related recovery and what is he really? Because he had a 45th percentile broken tackle rate, 3.9 yards per carry, explosiveness, that showed. But again, 205 carries, he only had a couple, 20-yard runs. That was it. So his ADP, I think it's perfectly fair. And again, I happen to fall right in line with it. Running back 38, just outside the top 100 picks. What are some thoughts you have on Brian Robinson as he goes into year 2, healthy now?
I think I described him on a podcast this week when we were on the clock in a live draft as a vanilla ice cream cone. The guy's, he is what he is. Like, Jim, yes. I don't think he's going to kill you. I think he's a guy that you can use on bye weeks. I think that there's going to be a little bit of competition there. Like, I think Antonio Gibson, the vibes are really strong for Gibson there. And I think Gibson, they're going to use more appropriately. They're not going to try to force feed touches. They'll use him in like a Jerick McKinnon role, with a little bit more carries. And I think that at the end of the day, I do worry about Chris Rodriguez a little bit, because I think Chris Rodriguez, the coaching staff really likes. That's a Eric Bieniemy guy that they went out and got. And Rodriguez didn't catch any balls in college, but they have said they think he's okay catching the ball as well. So I think they're trying to make Chris Rodriguez a thing. And I think it's kind of a direct challenge to Brian Robinson. Both were SEC backs. Rodriguez was a very successful runner at Kentucky. And I think that it's even though he's a 7th rounder, I don't want to brush him to the side. I think he's one of the more interesting RB3s right now. But Brian Robinson, more likely than not, returns value at that RB38. But I don't think he's going to do enough to really, really elevate your teams. He's a structural build guy. I would much rather pay up and take Antonio Gibson a round earlier than take Brian Robinson, about what are we saying? The 10th, 11th round in an NFFC draft. Yep.
As I look at Brian Robinson, and I love the vanilla ice cream cone reference, because I'm looking at it, I'm in PPR leagues almost unilaterally. Well, when we look at it, he's going to get me a lot of weeks, 6 or 7 points. That doesn't move the needle.
Yeah.
And so with that, I'd rather have a running back that's going to catch 3 passes, because with those 3 receptions, if something happens on one of those, he's already over that baseline, and anything beyond that's an extra. So I'm not probably going to have shares of Robinson, although my big board has him aligned with ADP. When I'm on the clock and I have multiple players, I'm going to take somebody that I feel has a little more upside. So I am going to pass on him. Are you going to have shares of him, Theo?
I don't think I'm completely against drafting him, but again, in that range, you're going to be able to potentially get a round earlier. You can get AJ Dillon, you can get Zach Charbonnet, you can get a Kendre Miller. So there's guys either that are a better at AJ Dillon's better at football than Brian Robinson, and we've seen him do it. And it's kind of a similar argument. Next to a running back who's going to catch passes in Aaron Jones, next to a running back who's going to catch passes in Antonio Gibson. So for me, I don't know. It's not a good enough offense where 2 running backs are going to put up massive points. It can't happen. Maybe Brian Robinson falls in the end zone a few more times than we're projecting. I think that's his out to beating ADP. But I think a lot of these guys that are capped by their receiving ceiling, it's just not as appealing. He's okay. He's okay, Jim. I don't think he's going to kill you. If you want to stand for him, it's it just know what you're drafting.
Vanilla ice cream.
Yeah,
Back to
there
the
you go.
ice cream. Yeah,
There you go.
exactly. And vanilla ice cream is quite good.
It's fun. It's fun.
I want to circle back real quickly about Antonio Gibson. In my mind, I was in on him 2 years ago. Last year, I was out on him. I'm back in on him. And it's all Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera wears his heart on his sleeve. I mean, this is the guy where if he tells you he doesn't like a player like last year, Gibson had no chance. But this year, he's back to saying he likes him for what he is. And so there's going to be a plan for him. And you reference this as well. Gibson is going to be, and Gibson self-proclaimed this on the news the other day, he's going to be the third down back. Clearly, he's been told that because, like, again, there are no surprises with Ron Rivera. And so when you're telling me that McKissick played about a half a season, he had 40 targets. Gibson catches 46 passes. Well, with McKissick gone, honestly, I see a world Gibson can probably catch about 70 balls. And when you're getting him in the 7th round of drafts or so, and I need a running back, PPR league, yeah, fire me up on Gibson all day long. Any last thoughts on Gibson?
No, I mean, the guy's proven time in, time out. He puts up fantasy points. He's averaged double-digit fantasy PPR points every year of his career. He's had 2, I think, double-digit touchdown seasons. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, Jim, but the guy's a talented receiver. Mm-hmm. He's a big physical player, and it's an offense that needs weapons. Like, I think Dotson and McLaurin are fine, but there's not a big target threat at tight end. There's not a big target threat at wide receiver 3. And we all kind of agree that Brian Robinson is a middling talent. So I think they're going to lean into Gibson. I think they're going to see what they can get out of him. And again, like, I trust Eric Bieniemy. This is a real opportunity for him. I think that the offense is going to be featuring their weapons. And I mean, we can all agree. I think Antonio Gibson's a much better player than Jerick McKinnon, and does anything Jerick McKinnon can do, Antonio Gibson can do better. So even if stylistically he has the exact same role, I'm completely in on Gibson. And hey, Jim, if he catches 70 balls, man, that's wheels up, man.
Yeah, and because they're going to trail. I know their defense projects it could be better, but they're playing a lot of tough teams. Like, they play the Eagles, they play the Cowboys. They're going to be trailing a good number of times. And when they do, they go in their turbo package. But I'm going to say one last thing. Gibson runs legit routes. He's not just a swing pass and a screen guy. Last year, it was maybe week 15, 16, he ran a deep corner route, and he catches this thing for like 35, 40 yards. It was a thing of beauty. But there aren't a lot of running backs that can go ahead and do that. And we got a quick comment about Jahmyr Brown. It's going to be a real big fight for him to move up the depth chart, because Curtis Samuel may not be much of a thing anymore, but if they're going to need a slot guy, he really profiles well to that end. And honestly, Terry McLaurin's a superstar. I believe that Jahan Dotson is as well. He's going to get there very quickly. I just don't know what the path to playing time for Jahmyr Brown is. Theo, anything on Jahmyr Brown?
I mean, Diami's kind of let us down in terms of, like, I thought he was going to be a very good player, when he came out of North Carolina, but I don't know. The Commanders seem to have, like, if you look at like the roster, they seem to have a bunch of these like big, strong, fast wide receivers, like behind in the depth chart. Like, Justin Watson ended up over there, and Jahmyr Brown. But again, if Curtis Samuel misses time, I think there's a path for Jahmyr Brown. But Samuel, like, there's not a lot of guys like Samuel. Samuel's the kind of guy you want to get on the field. Offensive coordinators always like Curtis Samuel. I don't think it's going to be like force feed touches for Samuel like we saw at the beginning of the year last year with Scott Turner. But I do think that he's not going to disappear. So I completely agree with you. It's a tough sledding for Jahmyr Brown to kind of become a thing this year.
Yeah, sometimes just situation and circumstance could be a little oppressive. We're not really questioning what he could do. It's when you get on the field. Hey, I'm a commissioner of a 12-team league, many of them, honestly. But the participants in that one particular league, they're all over the time zones. And most of us, spouses, kids, and I struggle getting a date and a time that works for people in the league. So this year, RotoWire comes out with a scheduler tool, and it really works well. If you want to take a look at it, go to rotowire.com/scheduler. It'll help you solve those problems when you're trying to get people together for a big draft. One more piece of news we're going to talk about, Theo. Dalvin Cook, the whispers seem to be that the Jets are going to, talk to him again this weekend. It sounds like it may be something that could be a thing. In terms of landing spots, the offensive line run blocking was really good in Minnesota last year, but Cook, in my mind, really showed sharp decline. Beginning of the season, he was fine. He was between 90 and 119 yards in like 6 of his first 10 games. And then down the stretch, 42 yards in 4 of his last 7. We saw his yard. So his broke attack rate still okay, 64th percentile, but he wasn't doing much after that. He was only 49th percentile yards after contact. So that was a problem. He's not the same player he was. And also the big plays, and we watch those highlights and they keep showing that 1 or 2 long runs he had. Well, there weren't many. They had to search for those because he only had 1.8% of his carries went for 20 yards. To me, declining back, the offensive line, again, not what it was in Minnesota. Breece Hall, we're not sure quite what we're getting there. What do we make of Dalvin Cook, Theo?
I mean, it's weird, isn't it? It's kind of like an NBA team that's like has like a super team, and there's a couple of like guys who've been ex-all-stars, and they all just end up on there. It seems like all these names keep getting linked to Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, but I do think there's some. I mean, I think it's gonna happen. I think he's gonna end up becoming a New York Jet. It makes too much sense, Jim. Aaron Rodgers restructures his contract.
Mm-hmm.
They free up space. All of the papers are reporting, that this might go down. Dalvin Cook needs a team, and then you also have the fact that getting Dalvin Cook, they're also preventing him from going to New England. And they're preventing him from going to Miami, which seem like the other 2 logical destinations. So I think it's an AFC East thing a little bit too. But it's not the greatest thing for, Breece Hall managers. Like, I think the argument is, yes, Breece Hall's the most dynamic guy there. But I don't think they would be bringing Dalvin Cook in if they thought Breece Hall was a chance at full strength, at least for the first beginning of the season. The Jets have a very challenging schedule to start the season. They have an early bye week. And right before the bye week, it's the Giants, which they play in the same stadium. It's like a huge landmine game for both of those teams. So, like, the Jets have a very high Vegas win total, and they have a very challenging early schedule. I think they really are, like, trying to load up. At the end of the day, Dalvin Cook still will have even a declining Dalvin Cook will still have a chance to, earn touches in that offense. There's been some good reports about Israel Abanikanda, but he's a younger player. Michael Carter apparently is meshing with Aaron Rodgers, but again, I think he's pretty limited. So I don't think they trust the Abanikanda, Bam Knight, and Michael Carter trio enough without Breece Hall. So this is Jets want to win a Super Bowl. They don't care about our fantasy teams. So it's, it could be a little bit more of a committee than we'd hope for, with Dalvin Cook seeing the most touches until Breece Hall's ready to go. I think the pie in the sky slenario, Jim, is the D'Angelo Williams Pittsburgh season, where he had an out of nowhere, like Le'Veon Bell is injured to start the year. Le'Veon Bell misses. I mean, we're going way back here, Jim, but you have to go like double-digit games. D'Angelo Williams is like a top 5 running back in a great offense. Then Le'Veon Bell comes back and is like a top 1 running back in the great offense. So, like, there's hope at the end of the tunnel for Breece Hall managers, I think. But if you're relying on Breece Hall, you have to understand that he's a second half of the year guy. Like, if you want to get back to that incredible usage and incredible points per game he was putting up during his ascent, that's probably going to be like after week 6. You've got to be able to survive with your roster until week 6, because I don't think they would be doing this Dalvin Cook move if they felt incredibly reliant upon Breece Hall to start the year.
So the ADP for Cook, running back 28, pick 78. So 12-team league, he's going in the middle of the 8th round. Based on the assumption he lands in with the New York Jets, Theo, are you invested at that draft cost, or are you hoping he falls a little further? How are you looking at this?
It's funny because I think that the ADP might tick up slightly if he lands on the Jets, just by the excitement of the signing. So his ADP is him being on the mystery team. I think if he would sign with Miami, I think people would draft him a little higher. But for me, I think if I take Cook in that round, I want to have upside guys built in with him. I think, like, if I take Cook and then maybe I take A-Chain the following round, I take a Kendre Miller in like the 11th or 12th. I think he does provide a path where I think Cook is going to get touches to start the season. I think he could put up RB2 numbers to start the year. And then, like you said, if you show the signs of decline, usually that's a harbinger of things to come in the NFL, especially at the running back spot. So I would not bank on him being a guy you could rely on for the whole season. But I do think, Jim, like, getting through that first month, right, with all the attrition at the running back position and the chance to hit the waiver wire, there's something to be said for that. So I wouldn't push him up in ADP, but 8th round is fine.
So that leads us to a question you referenced earlier. If they're bringing him in, what are the Jets telling us about Breece Hall? Because people are drafting Breece Hall not as aggressively as they were 3 months ago, but he's still a premium draft pick guy. So what are the Jets telling us?
I think the Jets are telling us that they want to win the Super Bowl and they want to make sure they have running back depth, and Breece Hall is not a sure thing right now. And I think that the optimistic argument would be we think Breece Hall is a superstar, but we don't want to rush him because Breece Hall is going to be much more important to us. That early bye week always scares me a little bit though, Jim, because we've seen these guys, if the injuries linger a little bit and that early bye week is there, you might not see him really get amped up until after that bye week. Like it's a really like, I don't know, for some reason the early bye week scares me a little bit just looking at Breece Hall. But I will say, like, again, structurally, Breece Hall, if you can get him in the 4th round now instead of the 3rd round, there's some upside there because if he takes a while to ramp up, once it happens, the guy is just, he's too good. Like, he's the kind of guy that'll come out on the field and get 15 points per game once he starts getting his usual touches. And he's also a super dynamic receiver. I think that, like, we've seen how Aaron Jones benefited from playing with Aaron Rodgers. I think, Breece Hall would be Aaron Jones on steroids potentially in the second half of the year. So, like, if he starts to fall too much, I think he could end up being a target. You just have to build your team structurally, knowing that might be a big fat 0 for the first few weeks of the year.
Yeah, because right now, last 3 days, fantasymojo.com ADP on Breece Hall is running back 12, pick 33. So he's back into the 3rd round, and that's an investment. And if you think that Breece Hall may go a month without seeing much work at all, you really have to be confident, like Theo said, in the rest of your roster build. You have to target running backs later that you can expect to go early on and have work to cover in case he's not there. It's a risk. It's a big risk to take, but you better be very confident you're going to be able to bridge that gap otherwise, because you don't want your fantasy team starting 0-4 to put yourself in a hole you can't get out of. All right, so that said, we're going to now talk about tight ends you need to draft in 2023. And by the way, there are great questions coming up in the chat. Please DM those to me on Twitter at Jim Coventry NFL, because we're just going to kind of stick to the script here. Can't keep Theo forever. He's got a life to live here. I got to get him rolling at some point. So the tight ends we're going to talk about in this section. Theo later is going to talk about one that goes earlier. Look, if you're already drafting Kelsey, there's not a lot to talk about. If you're invested in one of the high tight ends, you kind of know where they're going, and there are points we'll talk about them. But what we're going to talk about today is if you decide to punt the top 6 or so tight ends, we're going to talk about different tight ends that you might consider targeting in lieu of that. So let's start out with the tight end 9, about pick 80 in the last 3 days, Pat Freiermuth. And in terms of his points per game in the last couple of years, 13th last year, 17th the year prior, he did improve, and he did post a solid 732 yards last year. Now, the Steelers weren't in the red zone much, so he only scores twice. So we got to factor that in. He had 98 targets. For a tight end, that is a very strong number, especially at the draft cost that you're utilizing him for. Now, his yards per reception, 11.6. That was up over 3 yards from his rookie season, so that worked out really well. The whole thing is what you're going to think about the Steelers' offense. Kenny Pickett, a lot of different schools of thought on him. I still think he struggles to win on the perimeter. I think he doesn't have the arm drive to be able to beat corners. He has George Pickens who could win on his own, but that only goes so far. The middle of the field, to me, is a place where Kenny Pickett's going to have to thrive. He showed chemistry with Pat Freiermuth. So if you're looking for a tight end after those top 6 or 7 are off the board, I think Pat Freiermuth is a reasonable floor play. I don't think it's a 6 ceiling, but I think if you need a solid, strong floor, you can't argue with Pat Freiermuth. Initial thoughts on Freiermuth from you, Theo?
I've always been a big Muth guy, and I think the target you referenced, like, that's a super impactful number. Like, we don't get too many tight ends going over 100 targets a year. Like, you can count on one hand this year. I don't know how many will go over 100 targets this year, Jim, but I would guess if there was a Vegas over-under, it would be like 4.5, 5. There's like 100 targets is a really tough bridge for a tight end to climb, and Freiermuth doing that in year 2 was significant. Freiermuth is top 10 all time in targets for a tight end in their first 2 years in the league. Like Freiermuth has been a quick study, and Freiermuth also like had the Eric Ebron to start out his rookie season and then came on and took the job from him. I think it's so funny because everywhere you go, Jimmy, you start hearing the same, like a lot of these podcasts start sounding the same. You hear these people saying, positive touchdown regression, Deontay Johnson, 0 touchdowns last year. It's going to happen. He's back to normal. But how about Muth? Muth gave you 7 touchdown catches as a rookie. I mean, right. that's like a boss number for a tight end. And then he gives you 2 touchdown catches last year, despite the increased targets. So like everybody's looking for a Deontay Johnson big bounce back or George Pickens potentially taking a year or 2 leap. But at the end of the day, Freiermuth seems like the safe pick here to return value on ADP. I'm fine with the wide receivers where they go. The Steelers were dead last in touchdown passes last year. So like we can have question marks about Kenny Pickett, but being dead last 2 years in a row would be historical.
Yeah.
So like, I think that Muth is fine. I think there's still some upside. He's a year 3 guy. And hey, if, going from the high 90s to 115 targets, if he gets up to 115 targets this year, it's wheels up. He's going to really, really beat his ADP.
Yeah. So like I said, if you want that safe tight end, not a lot of risk, but you wanted to deal with other positions earlier, I do think it's a very strong target. Next one. Now, this one's way deeper. These last 3 are going to be way, way deeper. Earlier in the preseason, a few months ago, Juwan Johnson was getting like sleeper buzz, and he was getting drafted. That has dissipated. He, in the last 3 days, fantasymojo.com, ADP of tight end 20, pick 141. He is an afterthought. But I want to tell you a few things about Juwan Johnson here. First of all, in points per game, he was the tight end 20 last year, but he really didn't start off the season too strong. He is a converted college wide receiver. He was always going to need time to break out if he was going to, because a lot of these guys never pan out. But to me, it was a perfect trajectory for what we wanted to see. He gets 65 targets, but he puts up a 500-yard season with 7 touchdowns. And those touchdowns, they were compressed. They were in a week 7 to 15. He scored them all. But that was toward the end of the second half of the season. So we saw that sign of improvement. And what we see here is he's very strong down the seam. And that is a place in this offense that's going to be needed. Remember, Andy Dalton was the quarterback last year. I'll say something about Andy Dalton. Look, we know he's not a great quarterback. But what Andy Dalton does, he doesn't worry about pressure. He stands there until the last second, and if the ball was supposed to go to Chris Olave, he is getting the ball to Chris Olave till he takes that shot in the chin, because Andy Dalton's a tough dude. He's willing to do that. Derek Carr, Joey Bosa called him out on it. Look, we're going to see this guy in the fetal position if pressure's coming on him. The interior line for the Saints, not very good. The passing game, and we still love Olave, but there's going to be a lot of passing to the middle of the field because those are the quicker throws you can make. People got freaked out when Foster Moreau got signed. He's healthy now. He had an illness he was dealing with. This team is going to run a ton of 12 personnel. They did it last year, and they need to protect their quarterback. And they do have good offensive line play on the left tackle, Ryan Ramczyk. The right tackle, they drafted last year, Trevor Penning. We don't know what he is yet. He was hurt last year. Maybe he'll be good, but when he was on the field, he wasn't. But anyway, the point is this. The middle of the field is going to be needed. Juwan Johnson is going to be the receiving tight end in this offense. Foster Moreau will get some looks, but he's going to be the blocker here. Johnson is not cut out to be a blocker. So I have him super aggressively ranked, because remember, once we get outside of 9 or 10 tight ends, it's a crapshoot. It's a minefield. I have him as a tight end 12. It's probably a little ridiculous, but at tight end 20, I could wait till tight end 17 or 18 to take him when I need a second tight end. What are your thoughts about Juwan Johnson? Good or bad, Theo?
No, I think Juwan Johnson's fine. I just any like increase in use in like the intermediate routes versus being totally touchdown dependent. I mean, he showed us last year that he's a guy that can win in the red zone. He's had multiple, I'll say that, not to sound like multiple touchdown games in his career, which is, a guy that, you're able to find a mismatch and go to him. I think that's kind of like the tight end position is such a dumpster fire at times that why not chase touchdown upside? Juwan Johnson has certainly shown that. And I think that the Saints offense is going to be a lot more effective than it was last year. So I don't view Foster Moreau as a threat. Juwan Johnson has not been like a huge target of mine, but I think your argument for him, Jim, makes a lot of sense. Just a little bit of increased usage that's not so touchdown dependent on top of being a real red zone threat, I think is, a path for definitely for viability for him. And again, like starting to rank guys from like 12 through 20, that's a tough one. So why not chase the guy who proved it last year that he could be a touchdown earner? I'm fine with Juwan Johnson. I have him a lot in underdog, probably more than redraft right now.
Sure, that totally makes sense. Right, in the best ball game too, you're going to get yourself 3 tight ends, and you just need something, and you don't have to worry about the pop weeks either. So that works out really well. Before we go to the next one, I'm going to be at the Fantasy Football Expo weekend in Canton, Ohio, August 11th to 13th. Now, everyone's welcome to go to that. Tickets for that, you can get them at thefantasyfootballexpo.com. RotoWire's going to have a booth there. I'm going to be in a few of the expert panel discussions. If you go to the Expo weekend, make sure you find me and say hello. Now, Theo, the next tight end we're going to talk about is going to be Irv Smith. Oh, we had a comment about Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is listed in fantasy as a tight end, but honestly, he is not a tight end in the Saints offense. He's going to be used as a running back. He's going to be used as a gadget player, but his snap usage will not impact Juwan Johnson. Any disagreement on that, Theo?
No, I mean, he doesn't run enough routes and he doesn't catch enough passes, and he's more of a wildcat. If they had a W position in your lineup, he'd be the W.
Yeah, it's a great question. I love that 44-year-old. But yeah, he is 34, and I know 44 is a nice joke, and it is funny. But yeah, he's older than we think. He definitely is. We are going to next tight end, Irv Smith. Look, the first thing I say is, do we know if Irv Smith is even good? And the answer is no. We really don't know if he's good. But we know coming into the league, he has some athletic ability. And we know he's been hurt all the time. And so we've never really got to see any long-term consistent stretch out of him. And so he's going off the board as tight end 19, and that's a fair enough move. The only selling point I want to make on Irv Smith is this. In the Bengals offense, they learned in week 5 last year that the 2 high safeties were going to be a thing. That was what they were going to see. They figured out to move Burrow to the shotgun. When they moved him to the shotgun, they're like, our receivers could beat your guys, and our quarterback could read faster than you could react. And so basically, Joe Burrow became a machine. But the other thing that happened was teams will frequently put extra coverage, obviously, on Chase. Sometimes they'll even sell out and put extra coverage on Higgins as well. We saw chasms of space in the middle of the field last year. And it was crazy. It wasn't Tyler Boyd seeing the huge targets, but we saw Hayden Hurst getting quite a few looks when he was healthy in the middle of the field. Irv Smith, if nothing else, he is going to have a lot of open space. A quarterback who, when he sees the coverage is overwhelming, is going to take those easy yards in the middle of the field. And I think if Irv Smith actually ends up being healthy and good, and that's a long shot, I get it. But when you're taking him as the 3rd tight end, you went in real late, maybe the 2nd tight end, just the hopes something clicks. I just think the opportunity and the floor is tight end 18 if he could stay reasonably healthy. That's my case on him. He's a dart throw, but his situation couldn't be better. Theo, thoughts on Irv Smith?
It's the cheapest way to get access to the Bengals offense. And I think that the whole, the Hayden Hurst argument where they go get these guys with the high draft capital tight end, they plug them in and they give them 50-plus targets. I think that's going to happen with Irv. I mean, last year, Hayden Hurst had 68 targets, caught over 50 balls. I think that Irv can hit those numbers. Again, it's a way for you to build correlation with Joe Burrow. So if I take a Joe Burrow and I draft if I had drafted Chase or Higgins, I can also kind of load it in, and have a potential stack with Irv Smith. So I think it's appealing in 2 ways. I wouldn't love him as my tight end 1, but I think he's a fine tight end 2. And certainly like a better in best ball type guy. I mean, Irv did find the end zone in Minnesota. It was a disappointing career, but you're talking about a guy who's still young and was extremely highly drafted, Alabama tight end. And I think he's more dynamic maybe than Hayden Hurst. He's certainly smaller. And it's fine. I think that, your argument for these guys, Jim, like beating this sort of ADP, I think he can beat it. And I think he certainly can meet it. And again, I like getting access to that Bengals offense because they know what they're doing. They're going to score points. And there's a number of vacated targets there. You talk about the Hurst targets, the Pirine targets, And Tyler Boyd has seen his usage go down.
Yes.
He was only an 80 target guy this year. So, the like number 3 option some weeks is going to be Mixon, and some weeks could be Irv Smith.
Absolutely. So again, these are late dart throws if you're, especially if you're punting tight end, but these are players to think about. The last one I'm going to bring up, people are going to think I'm absolutely nuts. I get it. It's fine. I'm used to it. Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. I have to say of the Dallas Cowboys because some people may not be completely sure of that. So anyway, he is going fantasymojo.com ADP tight end 25 in the last 3 days. Look, I have him as my tight end 19. Here's why. So first of all, Dallas tight end position is often fruitful because Dak Prescott is a machine reading defenses. Once Dak Prescott realizes the design play to a receiver broke down, he is very good at finding the tight end in the vacated zone, and they're going to see a lot of zone defense. That's today's NFL. Dalton Schultz, people have been listening to me for years. He was a compiler, beautiful. He has no explosive ability, nothing after the catch for the most part. He was just basically a nice security blanket for Dak Prescott. Very nice in the red zone, but that's Dak Prescott to me. Whoever is the Dallas tight end walks into that situation. And I think it's a lateral shift, not a player, but it's a shift. Is this player's next up? I believe Ferguson is the guy. Peyton Hendershot, to me, is more of a blocker. He can catch some, and they draft Schoonmaker. I think he's a project like most tight ends are. Remember, most tight ends who get drafted take 2 to 3 years before they really give you much of anything. And if it's a first-round draft pick, which Schoonmaker's not, then that's not even like a discussion point. Ferguson only had 19 targets. Now, he caught 16 of them. 9.2 yards per reception, but I loved limited sample size, okay? But 79th percentile yards after the catch. But even before he got started, I said this was a guy with some explosive ability. And Dalton Schultz was a catch and fall guy. But now you're telling me the guy in the middle of the field can actually do something after the catch. In a Dak Prescott offense, I think he's going tight end 25. If you need a third tight end, if you're in best ball, again, if you punted and there's nobody out there, I think Jake Ferguson, I have him as tight end 19, and I could see a world where he finishes a tight end 15. Theo, hate him, love him. Neither.
I just tweeted about him yesterday. Dak Prescott tight ends have finished in terms of fantasy points at the position 9th, 5th, 16th, 15th. 2018 was a true split. Neither one did anything. And then back in 2017, 10th, and 2016, 16th. So like Dak Prescott tight end, the low there was 16th. Like you bring up Schultz, like again, like talking about where Ferguson was last year based on this year. Schultz didn't do anything and had a huge breakout year his first year getting time. Obviously, the Blake Jarwin injury helped with it, but I think, Jim, you're onto something here. At the end of the day, we want Brandon Cooks to be a thing, and we want like the wide receiver 2 to be a bigger thing in Dallas, but and we want CeeDee Lamb to continue to do what he does and Tony Pollard to get targeted. But at the end of the day, you can't change a quarterback's tendencies, and Dak Prescott always seems to have a comfort level in targeting a tight end. It's just always been something he did. We even had Jason Witten out of retirement come back and be better than where Ferguson is getting drafted right now. So like Ferguson, the big famous play is him hurdling a guy like last year, like he got out in the open field and he jumped over somebody. I mean, we never seen Dalton Schultz with that kind of explosiveness or athleticism. So it could be interesting. It could be like the Blake Jarwin, like we lost him to injury. It was like a hyper athletic tight end for Dallas. Now we could maybe have that this year, and Ferguson could end up being like a 6 touchdown guy. And if you can catch 6-7 touchdowns, you're going to beat that ADP easily.
Yep, love it. So those are your late round tight ends for today. They weren't the sexiest names in the world, but maybe they'll be sexy for you if you draft them and you win your league. Tomorrow night, which is Sunday, July 30th, depending when you're watching this, 8 p.m. Eastern, I'm streaming the pros versus Joe's draft that I'll be in. Other analysts in that draft who I personally know, John Paulson, Curtis Patrick, Doug Orth, Mauricio Gutierrez.
And we're in that one. We're in that one head-to-head, Jim.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I'm drafting with the GOAT District, and we won it all last year. All last year. Yeah.
So I have to add that to my tweet. See, when I see that your name wasn't like listed right with it. It was just
so it's Dan Williamson, me, and then John Daniel and Andrew Schellenberg. The Wednesday nights, the show I'm on Wednesdays is the GOAT District, and last year we won it, and we had to beat Chad Schroeder who finished second, and Chad and Chad and us were like, neck and neck. And anybody who plays NFFC, like Chad is the GOAT. He's the unquestioned. The guy's won more money than anybody ever in fantasy football, and he's a ridiculous drafter. Always does well in the pros versus Joes, and we were able to pull that one out. And Curtis Patrick, who's in our league, a couple years back, I had like a top 12 team in the pros versus Joes, but Curtis Patrick every year has a tremendous team. He finishes like top 10 in pros versus Joes every single year. So we're in a tough one. This is gonna be
fun.
So Theo,
draft. I'm going to give you the link to that show. If you want to join me during the draft, if you're comfortable at any point hopping in, you don't have to, but I will drop you the link to that in case you want to drop. I'm doing a live stream, so feel free to drop in, but I'll message you. All right. So the highlight of the show, we're going to spotlight Theo here. I'm going to shut up for the most part. And we're going to go over 4 players that Theo is highlighting in fantasy drafts that he likes ahead of the field. So we're just going to tee up here because I know I've kept you long already. Daniel Jones is the quarterback you like this year. Theo, floor is yours.
Yeah, so I think Daniel Jones, when I miss out on the top 8 or top 9 quarterbacks, I've liked to wait and grab Daniel Jones. If somebody reaches for him, I think you lose the edge there. But I've had drafts where he falls to like quarterback 14, quarterback 15, quarterback 12. I think he's great there. I mean, last year he had 708 rushing yards. He ran for 57 first downs. So the Brian Dable, attack really, really worked out for him. And he had 15 touchdown passes only, so he's going to need to take a step forward to get into like a top 6 potential fantasy scoring. But there's been a lot of jokes about the wide receivers the Giants have brought in, how they're all these small slot receivers. But I think stylistically, adding a Jalen Hyatt with his speed, adding a Paris Campbell with his versatility, and adding a Cole Beasley, like Danny Dimes has been a guy who's won on low A-dot throws for his entire career. They have a bunch of first down makers. They have dynamic Saquon Barkley next to him, and they've added in a true number 1 weapon for him in Darren Waller. So Danny Dimes is my favorite of the high-end quarterback 2s, the one I'm most comfortable drafting. And he's cheap enough, Jim, that I can draft a Danny Dimes and add a Geno with him or add a Anthony Richardson with him and have 2 quarterbacks where I'm going to play the matchups in case it doesn't work out. So I think he's a tremendous amount of upside. And I also like Brian Dable offense to take a step forward in year 2. The other guy I was going to talk to you about was also a New York Giant, was Darren Waller. Like Darren Waller has seen his ADP rise. At first, we were seeing him being drafted behind Dallas Goedert. Now he's kind of flipped Dallas Goedert, and now he's creeping up on the George Kittle, Kyle Pitts train. In San Francisco, George Kittle has Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and Christian McCaffrey to deal with every single week. Darren Waller doesn't have any of those things to deal with. Kyle Pitts also looks a little bit hobbled with his injury. Darren Waller, his points per game finishes at the tight end position the last 4 years were 5th, 2nd, and 6th. And then last year, in like the disaster year where Devontae Adams had a career high in targets and Darren Waller had a really big letdown season, he was still 10th in points per games at the position. This is a guy who's had 147 target year in his career. I don't think he's going to reach that level, but I think there's a chance that he gets to 125 targets. I think he can finish as a top 3 tight end this year, and I think he'll be the focal point of the offense. And we talk about Danny Dimes, the way he can win. I think having Darren Waller, moving him all over the field with that army of slot receivers is going to be a weekly weapon that we can rely on. And then at running back, a guy that I'm really excited about and a guy whose ADP I expect to rise the next month is Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs is already steamed up. He's like right on the border of RB1. Jim, you're going to be drafted in that RotoWire Online Championship in the NFFC. NFFC drafters are really pushing Gibbs up. I know a lot of other high-stakes formats he's getting pushed up as well. It's the receiving upside. It's the Ben Johnson offense. We saw last year how impactful Ben Johnson was for multiple players on that team. And I think that's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs as well. I think this year, I made a comment on another podcast, this year I think he could challenge like Reggie Bush, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey for their rookie reception numbers. I think that David Montgomery actually insulates him. I think it's going to keep him in the high value receiving looks as opposed to having to see him between the tackles. And I think Gibbs he can easily finish inside like RB8 land. And you're able to get him right now as an RB2. I'm super bullish on Gibbs. I think he's a fantastic talent. I'd be willing to take him as like my RB2 overall in Dynasty behind Bijan. And then lastly, I'm on Jerry Jeudy. I think Jerry Jeudy has become a great value. We've consistently saw Russell Wilson elevate wide receivers and consolidate his targets. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett had so many seasons where Russell Wilson was pushing them up into wide receiver 2 land or better. Jerry Jeudy finished the year last year extremely strong. He was like the one highlight of the train wreck of the Denver last year. He finished inside of wide receiver 2 land. I believe he was wide receiver 21 for the season. But over the last 7 games of the year, he averaged 18.5 points per game PPR. I think that's the bull argument for this year. I think the Sean Payton offense is going to be better than people think. You have shootout potential in that division, again, with 2 games against the Chargers, 2 games against the Chiefs. And I think Jerry Jeudy is going to have his career year. I mean, Jim, we remember this is a guy drafted ahead of Justin Jefferson, drafted ahead of CeeDee Lamb in that draft class. This was an extremely talented wide receiver coming out of Alabama. He's still young. There's a opportunity for him this year to have just an unbelievable season. I think he's got wide receiver 1 potential, and right now you can get him like wide receiver 20 price.
Man, this is a treat, Theo. This is a great opportunity to break some players out. Hey, before we get you going, though, tell us what you've got going. I want you to pitch your work, where people could find you, and everybody to know what's going on with Theo.
I appreciate that. Yeah, you can find my work over at Player Profiler. I write the waiver wire column during the season. Over the next month, you'll see a bunch of articles coming out. I have a couple of high stakes articles, as well as I do a teammate arbitrage article looking for cheaper teammates in the same position. I do a arbitrage article on, cheaper players a round or 2 later. There are similar results. I do a watch list for 0 and hero RB teams. All that stuff's going to come out this month. And then podcast wise, you can find me with RotoWire's Alan Seslowski on Tuesdays on the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast with Matt Kelly. We talk Dynasty. Then you can find me on First Class Fantasy with Billy Muzio. We usually air at 3:30 Eastern time on Thursdays. And then I have my solo pod press coverage that moves around, but I that's a one-on-one podcast with guests. And then I do the GOAT District Wednesday evenings at 9:00. And then I've been doing Billy Muzio's podcast, Man vs. Machine, lately. So, Jim, I'm all over the place. You can just find me on Player Profiler YouTube. And again, my written work at playerprofiler.com. If you want our world famous draft kit, you can hear Jim's thoughts and Alan's thoughts. Jim, which player did you do again, Jim?
T. Higgins.
T. Higgins. Okay, so Alan did Travis Kelce, Bijan Robinson, and Jim did T. Higgins. So if you want to hear Jim's thoughts on T. Higgins, you can buy our world famous draft kit and watch Jim on video. Spoiler alert, Jim likes T. Higgins, but you can see a little more in depth, and you can use the code Theo and get $10 off the all-in package.
Oh, remember, use Theo for the $10 off the all-in package. That's the way to go. I'd like to thank Theo Greminger for talking football with me today. Thanks to everyone for joining me. Join me again tomorrow, depending when you're watching it, Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern on RotoWire YouTube. My guest, friend and outstanding fantasy analyst, Matt Donnelly. Everybody have a great day, and thanks for your time.